Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to our principals, students, teachers who are joining us online. Welcome to our second, but rather first, Cybersecurity and Data Protection Forum for this year. I am Kimona Gordon, the Communications Manager at eLearning Jamaica Company Limited, and I will also be your moderator for this evening's event. First and foremost, we must apologize for the Honorable Favor Williams, the Minister of Education and Youth. She promises to join us this evening, but she is running just a tad late. So of course, we'll be joined by her later this evening, and she will definitely bring greetings on behalf of the Ministry of Education and Youth. I now invite our CEO, Mr. Andrew Lee, to come and bring greetings.
Thank you very much, Kimona. Good afternoon, everyone. Want to extend a warm welcome to our viewers online. Very happy to have you. As Kimona said, our minister is on her way here, and she will bring greetings when she gets here. But I want to welcome our panelists this afternoon. We have our four outstanding panelists who are going to talk to us on the matter of cybersecurity and data protection. We have with us Mr. Forrest, Mr. Cameron, Ms. Barkley, and Mr. Thorpe. Now, e-learning, we're extremely delighted to be here and to partner with the Ministry of Education on this, very important initiative to bring about awareness in relation to cybersecurity and data protection. Part of our mandate at e-learning is to help with the digitization of Jamaica, and we do provide quite a bit of technology to our schools primarily. But with technology, you have data, and with data, you run the risk of possible attack, and also there's the need for data protection. So we're here this evening to talk about that, and we have, as I indicated, a very distinguished panel to talk about that. Now, this forum is very timely because just yesterday, our Governor General spoke about, in his throne speech, highlighted that building trust is critical as we move forward towards becoming a digital society. He stated that the regulations under the Data Protection Act of 2020 are being finalized. He further mentioned that another critical pillar in building trust is strengthening cybersecurity capabilities. He highlighted that the government will be establishing a new National Cybersecurity Authority that will develop national cybersecurity policies, monitor cyber threats, provide skills training, and develop human capital. To help us better understand the relevance of cybersecurity, as I indicated, we have a very distinguished panel, and I'm going to just briefly introduce our panelists, starting with Mr. Forrest. Mr. Forrest is somebody who I know for a very long time. He has over 30 years of experience in the IT industry. His involvement in the ICT, in the local ICT industry, has demonstrated a commitment to driving improved standards for ICT and the adoption across the private and public sector, where he has consulted on the design and evaluation of numerous ICT projects and digital transformation strategies. He's also well known for evangelizing the adoption and the use of open source technologies across the public and private sector. Trevor is eminently qualified to address the matter of cybersecurity, which confronts us today. Ms. Barkley is our Information Commissioner. She's an attorney at law with over 14 years of experience at the Jamaican Bar, practicing in both the private and public sectors. As Information Commissioner, Ms. Barkley has strategic oversight for the establishment and operations of the Office of the Information Commissioner in keeping with the Data Protection Act of 2020. She's committed to using her knowledge and experience to create a regulatory authority which will operate with efficiency, transparency, and accountability in ensuring the protection of personal data in Jamaica. She believes that stakeholder engagement at all critical stages is key in fostering buy-in to new systems and ensuring optimal compliance with laws, regulations, policies, procedures that govern people in the conduct of their business and dealings with one another. This is exactly what today's event is about. Let me welcome Minister Williams. Professor Thorpe, he's going to be speaking after Commissioner Barkley. And Professor Thorpe is currently the head of the School of Computing and Information Technology at UTech. Professor Thorpe has served as the Director of Graduate Studies within the School of Computing and Information Technology. He holds a PhD, MSc, and BSc degrees in Information Security and Computer Science, and he's a graduate of the University of Technology. And I can safely say that he's also eminently qualified to address the matter of cybersecurity, which confronts us. Mr. Cameron, who is going to also address us, he's an attorney at law, and Chuck is the founder of Design Privacy, which is a consulting firm that helps companies comply with local and international privacy laws. He believes that by protecting informational rights and complying with privacy laws, allow for the free flow of information and ultimately the generation of wealth. He's an experienced attorney, as I indicated, with 23 years at the bar and has a demonstrated history of working in regulatory compliance in the telecoms and financial industries. He's skilled in privacy law, commercial law, and copyright law. We look forward to hearing from Mr. Cameron as well. But before I hand over to our hardworking minister to address us, to bring greetings to us, I want to highlight that Minister Williams was instrumental in the development of the Data Protection Act and its passage through the Houses of Parliament while she was Minister of Science, Energy, and Technology. Now she's Minister of Education. I wonder if she planned that. One of the largest holders of data in our country. And of course, this is an area that we want to focus on because we know that schools, educational institutions are holders of significant amount of data, and the need for privacy is extremely important. You'll recall, and I'll quote here, Minister Williams speaking in the Houses of Parliament back in 2020, indicated that data is considered the new gold, and the passing of this bill is critical to the government's attempt to delineate the rights of individuals in relation to the processing of their personal and sensitive data, and to establish the parameters within which data should be processed by data controllers in both the private and public sectors. She continued to say it by saying that modern jurisprudence has long recognized that simply providing and protecting the right to privacy is not sufficient to adequately safeguard such a right, and hence there emanated the need for legislation to treat with the protection of personal data and information concerning persons. Well said, Minister. I now invite Minister Williams to address us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Awesome. Thank you to the panelists for participating in this afternoon session. Let me say good afternoon to all those who are online at this hybrid cybersecurity forum this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And I hope that the information that you'll be hearing from our very experienced panelists and speakers this afternoon will be beneficial to you. So the Ministry of Education and Youth welcomes this collaboration with eLearning Jamaica to heighten public awareness about issues related to cybersecurity and data protection. This has become increasingly important amidst the increased usage of technology in our educational institutions. And coming out of the pandemic, significantly more of our students own a device. There's greater connectivity being put into our schools, adequate broadband connectivity, I might add, being put into our schools. So the technology, access to technology is getting more and more pervasive, and we want our students to know how to protect themselves when they enter this online world. We want them to know that their data is gold, and the data about them is their data, and they have to take ownership of that data and not just see it as something they give because some site asks them to input their name and address and their date of birth and all that important information. They need to begin to ask, is this really necessary to access this site? So we all must take responsibility for the security of our online lives. We have to stay informed of the latest threats, and keep our identities, information, and passwords safe. Cyber predators are out there, often looking for ways to access our personal data, and we can't afford to be caught off guard. This is why forums such as this provide us with a platform to share our experiences and best practices, not only to preserve the safety of our digital lives, but also to protect our technology infrastructure and national resources. We need to stay up to date with the ever-changing landscape of technology and cybersecurity, and today's discussion should help us to build on the needed awareness. So thank you again, Mr. Lee, CEO of eLearning, for the significant partnership between eLearning and the Ministry of Education and Youth. That partnership has only been deepening every day, every week, every month. And we really appreciate the thinking and the ideas that you continue to share with us. Thank you again to our professionals who are giving up their time this afternoon. Mr. Thorpe from UTech, yes. Mr. Cameron from his own personal practice, I'm sure many, many thousands of dollars for the time that he's been here. And Trevor Forrest, yes, 876, right? A professional, long-term professional in the industry whose voice we often hear on the radio in matters relating to technology. And of course, I think I'm meeting for the first time somebody from the office of the commissioner. Hi, commissioner. Good to meet you. You are going to be opening up a whole new world for us. A significant world, really, to help us understand the value of our personal data and that we are the owners of our data. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Mr. Lee.
Thank you so much, Minister Williams. And I must add, that color looks wonderful on you. You're wearing it well. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, before we delve into the first presentation, we have a little activity And we're just going to ask all principals, students, persons participating online through Zoom, as well as on our YouTube, that is on JS's YouTube channel. We just want for you to indicate the school that you're from. And Michelle, behind you, there is a laptop. Yes, I'm putting you on the spot, and I'm sorry. There is a laptop behind you, Michelle, and the school with the most representatives or attendees, of course, will receive that laptop. And don't worry, we have somebody on Zoom who is, calculating. So at the end of the first presentation, so if it is that you don't have anybody, you want persons to join because you want your school to get that laptop, please, I implore you, I'm asking you, go ahead, make those calls, get those persons online. We want persons, of course, to hear the information, that we are imparting to you today. And with that being said, I'm now going to invite Mr. Forrest to come and make the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Kimona. And let me first acknowledge the Minister of Education, Honorable Fable Williams, and everyone else who is here. It's really an honor to come and speak to and about matters of cybersecurity, especially as it relates to the educational environment. And one of the things that is often overlooked is the impact that cybersecurity and cyber threats have on the education sector. So we don't have a lot. I don't have a lot of time, so I have a very short presentation that I'm going to do. I just want to make sure that everybody can see the presentation. So just a little bit about my company. I started the company in 2006, and among other things, we do, information and data security consulting. We also do web development and a lot of stuff that has to do with the environments that schools find themselves in, right? Today, the focus is on security. And to put things into context, what I want to speak about first is how data and what we call the hyperconnected world, how it works and the value of that data, all right? So I thought I'd do that by speaking about things that are common and well understood by everybody. So everybody uses Google, everybody uses Facebook, everybody has a device, whether it's a tablet or a mobile phone. E-learning, distributes a lot of these devices to students and schools, and has done so for many years. But one of the things that I want to kind of talk about just a little bit, to put things into context, is we put a lot of our personal data out there. Google by itself has between 40 and 300 data points for every individual. Google knows what you search. They know, depending on the device you're using, where you are. They know what you've looked at on YouTube. They know the websites that you visit. They know information about the emails that you send, right? So there's a lot of information that they have about you. Additionally, Facebook and Instagram, a lot of people go on these platforms and they share a lot of information. They message each other. They share pictures. They share a whole bunch of information, not only about themselves, where they have been, where they're going, who their friends are, and so on, but they share a lot of personal information. And the interesting thing about the information that they share is Facebook or Instagram doesn't compel you to give that data. You give it of your own accord, right? So there's a lot of information that Facebook and Instagram has. And when you start to think about it, if you could combine all of that information that is stored on these social media platforms, it could easily be used to form a profile about you. And then finally, there's the information that you store on your device. Now, a colleague of mine, we often joke at the amount of data. Now, we've been in the industry for a long time, and the amount of data we walk around with, or storage that we walk around with on our person. 30 years ago, data centers never had that amount of storage. Now we walk around with devices that have, 64 to 128 gigs worth of storage. And on these devices, we store a lot of information. We store information about contacts, messages, emails, where we've been, where we're going, and all that. So on your device, again, which is connected to the internet, a lot of data is stored there. And what that means now in this new hyper-connected world is data, and you heard the minister say data is gold. Another adage is data is oil, the new oil. Data is also a new form of currency, right? And what it has led to is the concept of you, the person, being the product. Now, let me explain what that means. Because the data that you have is so important and is so valuable, you are now a product because your data has a significant amount of value. And that data can be sold, it can be traded, it can be used to add value to operations that occur. And what that does is it creates an opportunity for a new form of crime. And in doing so, what you find now is that the whole concept of cybercrime becomes huge. And I just wanted to again, put some things into context. The global cybercrime cost for 2021 was estimated at 4 trillion or so. In 2022, it went up to $6 trillion. So we're talking about $500 billion a month. That's the cost of cybercrime globally. Yeah. And again, to break it down, that's $190,000 every second. That's the value of cybercrime. Okay. Now you might say, well, that's a pretty big number, but let me put it into more context for you. When you look at the total cost of transnational crime, and we're talking about drug trafficking, human trafficking, small arms and weapons trafficking, right? When you add up all of these different transnational crimes, their total cost globally in a year is only $2.1 trillion. So cybercrime is good business because by itself, it clips all of these combined. That is the value of cybercrime, which uses and seeks out the data that you have. Now, and it's unfortunate that you already, Kimona already assigned how you're going to give away that laptop, because one big question I like to ask is, and you can still ask it, I guess, is by industry, which industry is the most targeted industry today? So most times, you would say, well, you have healthcare, you have finance, you have manufacturing, and so on. And every time I do this presentation and I show this graph, people are astonished because the most targeted industry is education. Yeah, and a bunch here right now are saying, what? How is that possible? And it's not by a small amount. Education and research is heavily targeted. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, educational institutions are easy targets because they don't invest a lot in securing the data that they have. The data that they have is extremely valuable because not only do they have data about people, but they have data about the work that people do. And a lot of that work is very valuable, especially when you're talking about value to corporate entities, intellectual property, and that kind of thing. So now, with this kind of information, we see why it is important to have discussions like this, because the education industry and the educational system is a prime target, not only because schools in general globally don't have a lot of security protection measures, but when we shrink that down to Jamaica, we don't invest a lot in securing information, and we are on a move to go digital across the government sector. We're on a move to go digital in the schools. But one of the things we must always understand is when we go digital, we have to start looking at investing in protecting a lot of that information, a lot of those assets. And this doesn't apply only to tertiary institutions. This goes from tertiary all the way down to primary schools, because all of them have extremely valuable data. So just to give you a couple of statistics, right? Cyber incidents against educational institutions went up last year, and this is 2022, by 75%. Again, somebody is realizing that there's a lot of valuable data in educational institutions. Schools are the number 2 targeted entity for ransomware attacks. And I mean, we've had schools in Jamaica that have been targeted in this way. You may have heard about some of them in the news. 30% of users in the educational industry have fallen prey to phishing attacks. 41% of higher education cybersecurity incidents and breaches were because of a thing called social engineering. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. 87% of educational establishments have experienced at least one cyber attack that succeeded. So you can see this is not, you know, the thing of movies. This is real stuff, and it's very important that school administrators, teachers, students, and parents understand that you are targets. So, what are some of the risks that exist? I'm just going to talk about some of the risks, and then I'm going to talk about how you can mitigate some of these risks, because it's important for you to know that you see that you're a big target. What are the threats and the risks associated with being such a target, and then what are the things that you have to do to mitigate? So, a couple of things. Identity theft. It's a major threat that exists in the educational system when you're talking about cyber attacks. And you might say, why? Because, well, the same information that you might use to shop or use for your bank account, that information is also stored in the student information systems in educational institutions, right? Name, address, telephone number, all of these things. We have phishing, virus, ransomware, and malware attacks. We have a whole host of different attacks. Quite recently, when we moved into use of Zoom during the COVID pandemic, we saw a lot of attacks on Zoom sessions and classes. On top of that, we saw the emergence of a new sort of attack called camfecting, where cameras were now used to target the people sitting in front of them, because many people using cameras don't protect the cameras, and a lot of interesting and sometimes compromising situations occur. So again, just to summarize some of these, we have phishing, we have data breaches, ransomware, we have IoT, Internet of Things attacks. A lot of us wear, smart devices. These smart devices have information about us. Yeah. So now, if somebody wants to know if you're anemic or you have high blood pressure or such things, they can hack into your smart device. If they want to know what your routine is on a given day, they can hack into these devices and know where you have been, what you do, what your lifestyle is like. You also have situations where social engineering, where you may get emails, and this falls into the category of phishing as well. You get emails purporting to be people that you know, or institutions that, you know, most times banks, that are asking you to do things, click on links and so on. These kinds of things most times are gateways into sticky situations, because these sorts of communications are created by threat actors to lure you into doing things that will then allow them to gain access to your valuable information, right? So you want to be very careful when you are getting communications or even sending communications, because you want to make sure that the communications that are being sent are legit and the communications that are being received are also legitimate. Another thing is, we find that because you know, we have a lot of unsuspecting children in school with, you know, new toys to play with in the form of you know, tablets or even cell phones, they too become targets for a variety of reasons. And if we don't take some time to educate them, make them aware of the dangers that they, you know, might run into online, because now everybody has access and we're giving them that access and we're doing that in a fierce way. But one of the things that we have to do is to educate them as to some of the threats and risks out there, not only to them, but because they do not use or understand the threats, and they're easy targets, your data at home now becomes something that is under threat, because they are the weak link, they are the open backdoor, and threat actors will use that to gain access not only to them, but the information that you hold there, right? So these are a lot of you know, just a couple of the things and the threats that you have to consider whenever you are functioning in the online space. And this applies to schools, this applies to teachers, this applies to students, this applies to parents, because everybody is now connected, and we're taking the time to give all of these tools to our schools. For the past, you know, almost 2 decades, e-learning has been actively doing that within schools, and as such, we now have to realize and make everyone realize that yes, there are conveniences, yes, there are benefits, but there are also risks. And we now have to educate people on the risks and how to mitigate them. So I was gonna go through and do some brief descriptions of some of these risks in a little bit more detail, but time won't allow me to. So let me move on to what schools have to do as part of the mitigation strategy for these threats, because we know now that the threats are real. And what now do we do to make sure that we protect ourselves, our school, our students, our teachers, and where necessary, our parents? So the first thing to know, all right, the very, 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 very first thing to know is cybersecurity is not an IT problem. It's the very first thing, because most times administration would say, oh, if it's cybersecurity, all right, I'll talk to the IT people. No, it's not an IT problem. Cybersecurity is everybody's problem, from the principal all the way down to the ancillary staff, right? It's everybody's problem. So don't for a second feel that you should farm off issues of cybersecurity to your IT department. It's a holistic effort that has to be adopted in order to ensure that every aspect of your institution is covered and protected. A couple of things that you want to avoid. You want to avoid disclosure of student records, right? This is private personal information. You want to ensure that whenever breaches occur, that the breaches are discovered quickly and the correct actions are taken to minimize the damage that these breaches may cause. You want to ensure that your credentials that you use to access your different systems are safe and that they're not misused. You want to make sure that your systems are adequately backed up, protected, and the data on these things are protected, because as you move into the realm of using more and more digital information, if you can't access that information, then you can't function as an institution. So your school information systems, when you find that you cannot access these systems, then school operations are affected, right? So a couple of things that you want to do, you want to make sure that you do, is that you make sure that you have the right IT governance infrastructure. You want to make sure also that you train your staff, your students, and your parents about security awareness. Very, very important. Now, to do these things, you have to start with what's called security assessment, right? Another thing that you want to make sure that you do is, through the awareness training, that you make sure that access controls to your data and your systems are properly managed, passwords that allow you to access these systems are properly managed. You're not using, simple passwords and so on. You manage third-party vendors who provide services to you, because they too can not only be targets, but they can also impact and steal the data that you have. So you also have to manage those very well. There are other technical measures that you can do. Make sure that your network is monitored and managed. You want to make sure that you do consistent security checks. You want to make sure that you are proactive in the way that you ensure that all of your systems, your networks, your computers, and the data that is stored on them are managed and maintained properly. So with that said, I think it kind of gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you're now faced with, right? Because what this calls for is reconsideration now of a whole new investment that you have to make to protect this data. And that investment equals money. And the question that you will now ask is, where the money going to come from? Where are we going to find the resources to protect all of this stuff? Because now this is something that you may not have considered before. So I think with that said, one of the things that you're going to hear of from the other presenters is the responsibilities that you're going to have, because some of these measures, it's not going to be a situation where you can choose. It's going to be a situation where by law, you're going to have to implement these measures, or you will be in breach of the law. So I think that a discussion will be had as to how to now best approach these new situations that you're going to find yourself in, how you're going to fund these things, and all of the different things that you have to do in order to make sure that you are protected and make sure that you protect the data that you have about your students, your staff, and all aspects of the institution that you manage. So I think I will wrap it there, and our next presenter will come and give you a little bit more information about how you can best protect, given the reality that is now facing you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Forrest. In the interest of time, we are going to delay on accepting your questions now, and we will take it after the second presentation, which is going to be from Ms. Celia Barkley, and she is the Information Commissioner coming from the Ministry of Science, Energy, and Technology. All right, my apologies, she's not from the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. While Ms. Barkley makes her way to the podium, I'm seeing representatives from Campion College. I'm seeing representatives from St. Hugh's High, Wilmer's Boys, the Michael University. I'm also seeing a representative from National University, San Diego, California. It's really good to have you online. So, ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead. We're going to give you some more time. Go ahead and ask, other members of your institution just to join us so that, they can also be privy to the information that we're sharing with you today. And also, we do have PowerPoint presentations that we're going to collaborate with the Ministry of Education and Youth in sharing these presentations with you at the end of the forum.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Let me first of all start by thanking the Ministry of Education and E-Learning for this opportunity to share with you all today. Now, I appreciate the opening statements of the Minister, who made us quite aware of the importance of our data as well as data protection, and also that of Mr. Trevor Forrest, who shone a light on just how important our data is, particularly as to its value. And the ricochet effect of that is a focus necessarily on the need to protect that information. Now, let me start first and foremost by pointing out that data protection in Jamaica falls within a regulatory regime that is made up of both the Data Protection Act as well as the regulations, which we have already heard are in the process of being prepared and which we expect will be promulgated very shortly within the course of the next several months. Now, supplementing the Act and the regulations, we will have data sharing codes that will provide general guidance as to good practice, as well as directives and guidance that our office will produce that may target specific sectors such as education, finance, health, and other areas. And so we can look out for the development of those things as the regime is built out. Now, just to put things in context for everyone, the Data Protection Act was passed in 2020, and the Office of the Information Commissioner established as at December 1, 2021. Now, on that date, certain sections of the legislation did come into effect, particularly those that speak to the creation of the office, its oversight committee, the ability of it to create data sharing codes, as well as certain other provisions that speak to international cooperation and other matters. However, generally speaking, the majority of the legislation is not yet in effect, consequent on there being a 2-year transitional period, which started on the 1st of December 2021. Now, what that means is that come November 30 of this year, that 2-year transitional period comes to an end, and we expect that there will be full implementation of the Act. Now, what does this mean for everyone? Well, first and foremost, it means that we will need to know and appreciate exactly what data is protected under the legislation. We will have to understand what data processing means within the context of the Data Protection Act, turn our focus on what the rights are of the data subjects that the legislation seeks to protect, as well as look at what the obligations are that are imposed on the persons that the legislation identifies as data controllers. Now, it's important to know that within any data protection regime, there are key standards for processing personal data that must be maintained. And so we will look too at what some of these standards are, and note that the Act does create certain offenses and imposes penalties for any breach of those standards and other provisions of the legislation. Now, concern has been raised from time to time to our office by different stakeholders as to the nature of the regulatory regime. Concerns have been raised in terms of the penalties that have been imposed or how strict the obligations are on different controllers. But let me just take this opportunity to point out that, as has happened in other jurisdictions, Jamaica is no different and does recognize the importance of having a strong data protection regime. And so one of the things that we have adopted, which has been adopted in other jurisdictions, is phased implementation of the Act. So as you will note, with a transitional period, it does give controllers an opportunity to put themselves in a state of readiness to comply with the legislation. Now, enforcement is critical and is key. We have noted that there are substantial provisions, or rather substantial penalties in the legislation for breaches. And while we appreciate the concern, particularly of smaller organizations, as to their ability to make these payments should they be found liable, we also have to point out to individuals that, as with other systems, it's important for there to be deterrence in place to encourage persons to comply with the legislation. And for educational organizations as well as other sectors, we also point out the extraterritorial effect even of our own legislation. Similar to the GDPR, which governs European Union countries, our legislation has built-in provisions that will ensure that should there be non-compliance that affects our nationals, whether locally or wherever they are, or by persons even outside of our territory, the provisions are in place to ensure that action can be taken against those persons in breach. So we are operating consistent with what are the ordinary practices of other legislation. Now, just to explain a little further, personal data, as you have heard discussed, for example, by Mr. Forrest, consists of a wide range of different information. So when you speak about personal data, you're talking about just about any information by which an individual can be identified as a person. So everything from your name to your address, to your TRN, to your email addresses is included, but it goes beyond that. We speak also to your DNA, we speak also to biometric data, and particularly important, especially to educational institutions, is what's considered sensitive personal data, because we know that a lot of the information that these organizations keep will fall within that category. So, for example, when you're registering students, you are looking at things such as their relationships with other individuals. How many of you have registration forms that ask about parentage, ask about sibling relationships, ask about things like your date of birth? Some of us in applying for institutions, particularly at the tertiary level, have been asked as part of that registration process to submit a medical certificate that might include other private information, including as to our health records. These are all information that is protected under the Data Protection Act, and of which organizations, their managers, their administrators will now have to be very mindful as to the level of security that they have, but beyond that, the level of privacy attached to these information and how they're to be treated. Now, the Act is looking at the processing of information and the protections that need to be in place for that. However, I'm imploring the persons that are watching today to appreciate and understand that when we talk about data processing, we're not necessarily talking about a formal process in the way that some people conceptualize it. We're not necessarily talking about the most technologically advanced process or system. When you look at how the Act defines data processing, you realize that every possible way that you can manage and use information from the moment you collect it to the moment you destroy it is included in the definition of data processing. So however you choose to store it, however you choose to manipulate it, whatever purpose you choose to use the information for is captured in some way in the definition of data processing. Now, whether or not that information is being handled by you to some extent becomes irrelevant, because there are those persons who are going to say to themselves, well, yes, the law does impose an obligation on me to protect this information while it is being processed, but I've engaged someone else to do this on my behalf. It doesn't matter. One of the things we want to drive home to institutions at all levels and certainly to their management is that whether you do this on your own or through some third party, this legislation is going to hold you responsible for any violation that affects a data subject. And the data subject is everybody and anybody. It's me, it's you, it's your students, it's your employees, it's your other stakeholders. It is anybody for whom you hold and control information. And so this legislation, in seeking to protect all those persons, imposes an obligation on you to treat with their information in a particular way. Now, one of the key considerations that we want to bring to the forefront of institutions' minds is the requirement under the Act for certain specific types of controllers to appoint a data protection officer. If you have not thought about this before, then this is something that you need to start thinking about now, because under the legislation, certain persons have no choice but to appoint a data protection officer. Public authorities, which is very widely defined, must appoint a data protection officer. Large-scale processor, which has a relatively subjective definition, has to appoint a data protection officer. Now, if you are processing certain volumes of information, or you have very complex processes or multiple processing activities, then it may be that you're required by law to appoint a data processing officer. So you now have to give thought to who is going to be the ideal person in your organization or outside of your organization to carry out this function for you. What arrangements are you going to put in place for that function to be performed? At what cost is this going to come to your organization, and how are you going to fund it? But it's not avoidable. And in some ways, it's not just necessary, but beneficial, because your data processing officer is that individual who has a duty under the Data Protection Act to assist you, as well as the OIC as regulators, in ensuring that personal data is protected. So your data protection officer is going to first and foremost ensure that you are complying with the legislation. This is somebody that is going to examine what your data processing activities are. They are going to be looking out and being your watchdogs for breaches. They're the persons who can make recommendations as to how you rectify or remedy a situation in the event that there's any contravention. But more than that, this is also the officer that you need to appoint to ensure that you are in a position to allow each data subject for whom you hold information to access and exercise their rights. So this is an individual that, in addition to monitoring your level of compliance and assisting the data subjects in accessing their information, making a complaint if necessary, accessing any remedy that they may have, this person also have a responsibility under the Act to report any non-compliance to us. And they have to do this within a reasonable time. Now, we've heard from several controllers in terms of why should they essentially appoint somebody that has a duty beyond their entity, somebody that at the end of the day, they are going to be reporting them to the authority. Well, it's very simple. One, the law may very well require you to, but two, it is in your interest. We heard before in the previous presentations about the need for trust, particularly as we move towards a digital economy. Your appointment of a data protection officer is one way of indicating to your stakeholders, whether these be internal or external persons, that you are serious about privacy, you are serious about security, you are serious about data protection, you are serious about having effective mechanisms in place to ensure that when incidents happen, which they will, because as we know, not everything is in your control. Organizations have been repeatedly hacked with no explanation as to how they were targeted. In some cases, it takes months for them to figure out how persons got into their systems. But you're having a DPO and you're registering with the office is going to be that signal to other persons that you are serious and minded about being compliant Now, please note, notwithstanding these responsibilities and obligations, your data protection officer is not your scapegoat. Many persons have taken the view that if it is that they are now subject to a legislation that is going to impose all this responsibility on them, some of which, in all honesty, it might be outside your knowledge and technical expertise. And so if you have identified someone to assist in this regard, then should that person not be held accountable in the event that something is wrong? That's not necessarily the case. The responsibilities that are imposed in the legislation are imposed on controllers. So every organization now has to see themselves in a new light. You have to look at yourself not just as providers of knowledge, you have to look at yourself as protectors, guardians of people's information, and recognize that where you fail, you cannot necessarily blame one particular officer. You are the one that will be held accountable. Now, the legislation does give certain rights to data subjects, and it is the duty of the data controller to uphold these rights. Now, this includes a right to access their information, and for educational institutions that collect a wide volume of information, you now need to consider as to how is it stored, how accessible is it, how easy will it be for you to distribute this information if you're called upon to do so. If it is that your student or even an employee, perhaps a teacher or a lecturer, determines that they would like to know exactly what information you hold for them and how this information is being processed, are you now in a position to readily provide that information to the individual? What are the mechanisms that you have in place to ensure that they can get this within a reasonable time? Because please note that you do have an obligation to respond to requests for access to information within 30 days under the legislation. Now, even if it is that you are able to do that, you have to now consider what are your complaints mechanisms. Because one of the things that persons need to be mindful of is that in addition to giving rights, this act reinforces that subjects for who you hold data are entitled to remedies, and that includes compensation where there's a breach. Now, if you don't want to get to that point, you need to ask yourself, how can you treat with a complaint once it's received? If you're approached by a student or a student's parent or a teacher or someone who says, I believe my information is being wrongfully used, or I believe that my information has been disclosed to someone who ought not to have received it, how do you now deal with that complaint? What mechanism do you have in place to treat with it, and what remedy can you provide to the individual? Because an aggrieved person who doesn't feel satisfied by your response may now take it to the OIC as the regulatory authority. And if necessary, under investigation, depending on our findings, it could very well be that as an organization, you might be held responsible, and you may find that you're advised that the subject is entitled to some amount of compensation. How will you treat with that kind of situation as an institution? Do you have things in place for that? Now, this is just one of several rights that the Act gives to data subjects, but there are certain key things that we also want you to point out. As data controllers, control is what is critical for you, but we want you to look at control in a different way. So control is critical for the controller because that is what identifies you as a controller. How you determine what is processed and how it is processed and to whom it is disclosed. If you hold that authority, then you count as a data controller for the purposes of this legislation. And so you are bound by all the obligations that we just mentioned. Included in those obligations are your obligation to register with the OIC once we commence registration when the Act is fully implemented. Having registered, you will then have a further obligation to maintain that registration by submitting an annual data protection impact assessment. Now, registration, and we look at that in a little bit, can be a very tedious process, especially if you haven't started already. It does take time. It takes a significant investment of human resource, because in order to register, there's certain information that you must provide, and that information is a lot. It looks at all the data that you process. It looks at how you process it. It forces you to try to identify the basis on which you are collecting and processing this information in any way. And it asks you to consider also to whom that information is disclosed and how. And so you have to start the process from now in terms of preparing for registration as a controller. But even beyond registering, please note that considering that paper records are covered under legislation, considering that processing doesn't have to be an electronic process, but can also be a manual process, then you realize the amount of information that you have to have your finger on in order just to meet the registration requirements, not to mention to ensure that you are complying with those requirements. Consider for a moment that you have to be able to document when each piece of information is received or amended, because that at the end of the day might determine what you are obligated to provide to a data subject. Are you ready? So these are just some of the considerations that controllers should have when they're looking at getting ready to identify as controllers to a regulatory authority. But beyond that, your primary obligation is to ensure that you uphold the data protection standards. Now, other presenters are here that will speak to how you can go about ensuring that you have adequate measures in place for data protection, particularly as it relates to data security. But beyond that, in terms of what privacy means and what it means to have a governance system in place to enable you to deal with the privacy issues that might arise. But as I wrap up, I want you to look at considerations that you should have in mind when you are looking towards data protection and focusing yourselves on security. Think about the fact that security is only one aspect of data protection. And even the most secure system in the world, if you have invested widely in your antivirus, if you have bought all the spyware possible, if you have hired the top IT technicians in your organization, you can still fall short of the requirements under the Data Protection Act because you have not met the requirements in terms of the privacy components. You have not met the requirements in terms of the access components for your data subjects. You have not met the requirements in terms of how the arrangements should be in place for the disclosure of information, whether it is to your data subjects or to other persons. And so I leave with you the message that as educational institutions at any level, whether it is the primary, secondary, tertiary level, considering the number of data subjects that you have who are dependent on you to protect their data, considering the vast amounts of data that you keep for each and every person, that you now look at yourself in a new way as a controller. Consider what your obligations are under the Act, but most importantly, respect the rights of your students, your staff, your other stakeholders as data subjects, and ensure that you protect those rights and allow them fair opportunity to exercise them if the need arises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Barclay, for that informative presentation. We are running behind time, ladies and gentlemen, so we're just going to ask you to bear with us. We're going to try our best to catch up. But what we're going to do now, we're just going to allow 5 minutes. We're going to open the floor for questions. So, of course, in the Zoom chat, we're going to ask for you to, of course, type your questions there. And persons who are on YouTube, we're also going to ask for you to type your questions in the chat. I'm seeing one where somebody's asking if it is that the presentation will be made available. Yes, presentations will be made available. We will collaborate or work with with the Ministry of Education to ensure that schools, are in receipt of said presentations. Also, if you are joining us on YouTube, the forum will also be on Watch JIS. So of course you can definitely go there and watch it again. So just waiting to see if it is that we'll have any questions. If not, we're just going to allow one more presentation, and of course in the interim, please go ahead and type your questions and we'll take them after this presentation. And the next presentation will be done by Professor Thorpe. Professor Thorpe?
Happy New Year to everyone. I know it's February. Minister, colleagues all, fellow teachers, educators, administrators, students. Okay, so I'm a professor of cybersecurity at the University of Technology, Jamaica. But today I'm serving as an administrator because I'm also Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Computing, which is what I currently serve substantively. The University of Technology, Jamaica, where I'm at, provide a leading curriculum in cybersecurity and data protection. So the first call to action, Minister, is that we will provide for all the teachers, I'm going to give a bigger gift than the one you have over there, e-learning, where I'm prepared to offer all the teachers a free cyber workshop specific to the issues of data protection and cybersecurity for how it impacts the classroom and the school environment. Let's clap for that, man. That's very important. And you're here to support. Excellent. So I need to make that disclaimer, put that out there, that right away, there's a lot that we are saying here that can't really be unpacked in such a short time. And hence, we'll make that available. I'll work with your office, Minister, to ensure that we provide that training to all the educators, and particularly starting with the administrators, which is the principals, all school administrators, to actually take a careful look at this very, very important area. You know, having the distinction of going behind Trevor and the Information Commissioner, I could become nervous just thinking about the implications of what the provisions in these acts are. You know, they don't mention any figures in the teachers and educators, the $2 million per transactional breach, 7 years imprisonment. You can have 4% of your business wiped out easily. 4% in education is a lot. It can wipe out schools completely. But we will think about the positive by looking at the opportunities. Now, how I'm going to approach my short talk with you is the fact that the cost that is being suggested about cybersecurity and data protection really is hidden. When we think about schools, so as an educator, we have a situation where we have to put the computers in the schools for the youngsters to be learning on. We don't really refresh computers more than 5 years at a time, but some instances 10, 15. So therefore, those computers are very vulnerable to various security attacks. The schools, from the primary level to the university level in some instances, but less at the university level, don't come with IT infrastructure to support the classroom environment. It's traditionally a classroom or a laboratory where you have computers, or even the staff quarters, that if something goes wrong, somebody who knows a little bit about computers comes by and try and offer some assistance. So a massive education program around how we're going to treat with that is important. But now let's talk about the cost of cybersecurity and the fact that, if I'm speaking carefully to the principals first, there's no line item in your budget that says, okay, if you have a cybersecurity breach or you have a data protection impact assessment, as was suggested, okay, hold on, where in the line item currently we're going to call out that so we can make a spend? And somebody online or here, as we have the discussions, probably can help us unpack that a little bit more. Even in the university environment where I am, I do not have that line item. I don't have that line item. So therefore, a consideration for that is equally important. We need to put something called cyber insurance in place, which is becoming quite popular in other jurisdictions. It's not really here in Jamaica. And it's not the traditional type of insurance like insuring a car, but insuring your data, which simply means the infrastructure that supports the data and the protection need to be there. How are we going to fund it when the type of subvention available to the national schools is already a managed product? It's already a managed situation. And hence, the first thing we'll have to do is to account for the line item, and we're going to have to, as educators, lobby with the parents and the students and our alumni from the various institutions about coming up with a suitable financial model for considering how cybersecurity and data protection becomes an important and sustained line item in budgets. I will dare say it has to be a policy provision within the school system. Probably it all comes all the way to the ministry, Madam Minister, where we look carefully on unpacking that in terms of the operational provisions within schools, as simple as a primary school all the way to the universities. We need to look very carefully at the implications of what that means in these various environments. I don't think any of us, to be sincere and transparent about this, have spent the time looking at that costing impact, right? And I would dare say national institutions are challenged. Private ones also are challenged. And if we go into business communities are also challenged. From small, medium to large business are concerned about the type of investment. Then what says the schools? You see what I'm saying? As a part of the jurisdiction for which we have remit. So today I'm really talking to the educators, we're talking to the students, we're talking to parents, and we're talking to alumni who really have the best interests of our young people, right? And some of us who are not so young, we still have to go to school. So the school is a nurturing place. It's a nurturing ground. It's both a physical space and it's also a virtual space. Hence, it is supposed to be a very safe place for persons to be learning and growing. With all this talk about cybersecurity attacks and data protection provisions, it begs the question. I mean, within the last year at the University of Technology, Jamaica, we had to put some submissions as a working paper to government about creating what we call a sandbox for schools, such that the reason why Mr. Forrest was able to easily reel off the figure to indicate that schools actually have the highest susceptibility to attacks is that the school environment is an experimental ground for our young. So most of our youngsters are digital natives. They are playing with the technology. They're exploiting their options. So do we put them also before, I don't want to use the term firing squad. It sounds a bit strong, right? But as data subjects, they themselves, right? They could be victims of their own experiments. They could be victim of their own experiments. And this requires a reimagination of the learning environment. It requires significant digital transformational thinking in the learning environments. And hence, that is why we have to start with a massive training program to support the type of understanding required and to start with the leadership. So school is a virtual place and it's a physical place. The lines are very blurred these days. Today, even this current forum, we're in a physical environment and we're also in a virtual environment, just sharing. And we could be subject to attack at any time. In Jamaican parlance, you say you're not bored, right? Now, the problem is even more compounded as it relates to how we have to think about the investment for the school environment. In very recent weeks and months, you are now faced in a school environment where artificial intelligence, right, is the new order of the classroom. And with these new chatbot technologies that are out there, I won't call any names, right? But with these new chatbot technologies that are out there, where it can self-learn, children, right, will exploit the opportunities of those technologies. There will be some level of challenge, I will tell you, for data protection and cybersecurity legislators to determine who was the source of a particular crime. When you have self-learning machines that are so bright that can take tests and pass exams and do research papers and write books, there's no end here, right? So I'm just keeping a casual conversation with you this evening where I'm going to say we have to reimagine the classroom. I must tell you, Minister and colleagues at UTech, have said to the community that, listen, you know, technology is here to improve our lives. We were saying that the era of generative artificial intelligence might be 10 years off. It's here right now, right? It's already here, and it has caught us all napping. So hence, in the larger scheme of things, as it relates to cybersecurity and data protection, we are now also competing with the robots as a part of the data processing. And the robots are in the classroom because the students are using it to complete their assignments. Teachers are using it too. You understand what I'm saying? To help them augment some classroom outcomes. There's a good and bad to all situations, but there's also a cybersecurity and data protection concern that sits in the mix of that we have not even started to discuss. And hence, that is why I am saying we have to put a full training program in play. So therefore, I'm using this platform today to support, in very short order, to have a cyber leadership and data protection workshop. We're really planning one for the private sector as well, but I think it is even more urgent for the school system because the future of businesses is going to be dependent on the youngsters who are leaving the schools. Just logical thinking, all right? And hence the opportunity. So I'm in a position where I can declare it that we will have that forum. All that needs to happen, and we'll have to have it week long because there's several issues. It can't be 1 hour or 2 hours, it's 1 week. Because in our traditional curriculum, we run it for 13 weeks, but we can offer to educators 1 full week on campus where we unpack the complexity of some of these concerns from both the financial standpoint to the technical, to the social, cultural, right, implications that it will have for how these educators have to go back into the classroom and support our young people and to also support the country on a whole, right, in responding to how the matters of cybersecurity and data protection are to be treated. Those are my few short comments, all right? So I am leaving you with something bigger than a computer. Mr. Lee, I'm giving you 1 week free workshop at the university, And we'll set that up in short order. Thank you. All teachers, so we'll start, yes, Minister, we'll start with the principals, then we'll move to the teachers. We'll have to set up a program around that. Well, that's the purpose of the university anyway, where that is concerned. And we provide the best cybersecurity education in the country. And we're doing it everywhere. That's a plug. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Thorpe, for that presentation. All right, so just to take some of your questions really quick. All right, so we have Mr. Daniel Kaur, and Ms. Barkley, this one is for you. He's asking, is the OIC prepared to handle all of the information that will be flowing through it in the near future? What processes does it have in place? And will the process be, no, I had that wrong. What processes does it have in place to ensure that registration and compliance will be as painless as possible? And there is another question. Somebody's asking too, where can they? Okay, my apologies. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, as to the readiness of the OIC, we do recognize that as the regulatory authority, we ourselves will have a large volume of information that is coming to and passing through the office. We are in the process of building out the office, and that does include establishing our own internal processes and systems for dealing with the information that we are supposed to receive. As it relates to the painlessness of the registration process, we are contemplating how best we can go about having that process automated, particularly via the use of electronic means, including online applications. And so we are exploring the options for having that system developed as well. As you know, the Act is new and so is the office. And so the process of the development and establishment will take some time, but efforts are being made and resources are being put into the office and behind us. And we do hope and aim to be ready for the full implementation of the Act on the 1st of December this year. Thank you.
All right, thank you. A question from YouTube, again to you, Ms. Barkley. How can one get a copy of the Data Privacy Act?
The Data Protection Act is available online from various sources. It is available from the Parliament's website. It is also available by way of the webpage that is dedicated to the OIC on MSET's website. So if you go to www.mset.gov.jm/OIC, you will see the Act as well as the gazettes that have been published pursuant to the legislation appointing the Commission, as well as the Data Protection Oversight Committee and other relevant documents.
All right, Professor Thorpe, this one is for you. Will the course at UTech be online or face-to-face?
Oh, this is for is this a teacher asking a principal educator?
I believe it's an educator, but I'm not sure.
Yes, we're going to make it available in both formats. So it will be in a face-to-face format on campus, but we'll also actually have it running, through Zoom, for example, to support some of the engagement. But rather them come face-to-face, because we'll have some activities that, they could benefit from significantly in the face-to-face format. Yes, but we'll do both.
All right. There's a question here, and I believe it's, just for anybody on the panel. What challenges do organizations face locally in implementing data protection policies? That is one. The second part of the question, how is Jamaica aligned to international best practices for data security? And then there's a statement, as an educator, our curriculum has both nationally and regionally have limited in any data protection. maybe MOEY can create learning resources, including interactive content to use in digital literacy for students, parents, and teachers. So let me just repeat the questions because, of course, it's open to members of the panel. What challenges do organizations face locally in implementing data protection policies? We'll take that first question.
So, well, we are in the business of implementing data protection standards that flow from the legislation. And the primary challenge that we see organizations face is first leadership understanding the need to do so. That's a fundamental challenge. Having understood that, the second challenge that we see is an underappreciation of the not only the cash outlay that will be necessary, but the human resources that will be necessary to do it on an ongoing basis. Getting a consultant to implement the program for you does not relieve you of the work to be done. It is very heavy lifting, and in the context of data protection, it's not just the issue of issuing a policy and you say I've implemented it. No, at the end of the day, what I'd like to tell my clients, when the information commissioner, officer of the information commissioner comes knocking at your door, yes, she wants to know that you have the paperwork in place, but when she enters your office and makes a data subject access request of the person sitting at the front desk, if that person doesn't know what that is, that means you have not implemented that policy. So the biggest problem right now is an awareness and an appreciation of the work that has to be done.
Okay, great. I see Professor Thorpe. You have something you want to add to that?
I would advocate that the governance structure in education will have to change as it relates to, the portfolio of the data protection office and the data protection officer. I will argue that where private sector companies are putting in place data protection offices and officers, and the university system has now started that as well. I would say for the purposes of the general school system, from the primary level to the high school level, there should be a mechanism that we look at, or a framework that we look at, to support a data protection officer for the school system. I'm not saying that it has to be one person, but there has to be a sort of an oversight in place to support the responses to the commissioner here, right? Going forward. But we should work together on achieving that. So that's an enabling capability that speaks to or expands on the thought by Chuck just now in terms of the human capital that is needed for the environment.
We're just going to take Mr. Forrest, and then we will have Mr. Cameron. So go ahead, Mr. Forrest.
Yeah, so one thing I just wanted to point out as well, you do have what I like to tell our clients, two components as it relates to security and protection. You do have the compliance component, which is broadly viewed as legal and policy based, but you also have a technical component that not only do you need to have the right policies and procedures and clear understanding of that, you need to have systems that enable you to protect in a way that allows you to be compliant. So you do need to have that consideration as well, both at the hardware and software level, and also those attendant processes and procedures to make sure that you have total and complete compliance for not only data protection, but against the impending threats that will cause you to fall out of compliance.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to take the final presentation. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce his first name. I'll just say Mr. Cameron. He will, let you know what his first name is. I'm not going to do that. But just so you know, to our educators who are on Zoom, the tally is in. We have the numbers for the school with the most attendance. So we are going to announce that at the end of Mr. Cameron's presentation. So Mr. Cameron, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Minister, and thank you for having me here, e-learning. This presentation is very timely and a very important conversation. And it's good to know that e-learning is playing a leading role in this. I think it's very appropriate. So a lot of emphasis has been placed on the question of protecting data, in protecting information assets, and protecting against threats. Data protection has one primary subject, has one primary focus. And in the school context, we are speaking about protecting our children. That is what this is all about. It is not about preventing a breach. It is not about preventing the loss of information. It's about protecting our children. I'm not sure if my screen is being shared. Can anyone confirm that my screen is being shared? Can anyone say yes or no? I'll continue. Right, so that's the first message that I really want to convey. Data protection in the context of the school environment is about protecting our children. Why do I say so? Well, not because the legislation itself says that when considering the risks associated with cybersecurity or data protection, you must consider the risk that your data subjects are faced with. So this is not something nice and airy-fairy that I'm saying. That is what the legislation actually requires you to do. Very interestingly, the legislation does make provision for different types of entities. So the legislation requires you to think about the type of data you're processing, whose data you're processing, your resources, the resources that are available to you, and the risks that you're exposed to. So it is not one size fits all. Let us stop and think about this for a second. So in the brick and mortar world, Minister, I'm sure you can confirm this, very often in response to the geography in which school sits, in response to the threats, the physical threats that face schools, very often heavy emphasis would be placed on the ability to secure the physical location of the school. They would have fundraisers to build walls. They're speaking about having security guards with metal detectors, and there's a very aggressive police in schools program, all about protecting the schools, their physical well-being. In today's digital age, is that the biggest threat? When we meet the need that was created by COVID to ensure that our children could continue receiving an education, a very aggressive push was made to ensure two things. There was internet connectivity and physical devices, and then the delivery of the content. Yes, there was a multiplicity of other mechanisms used to deliver teaching content, but we very quickly took all our children into the internet world and the information age. As parents, as school teachers, you'd often tell your children, don't speak to strangers. If somebody come knocking at your door, don't give them any information. No. When you put children online that have never been online before, it's just a totally different world. Do you know who they are speaking to? When they're playing games online, virtual games with all of their friends, Do you know who their friends are? We do have real life predators. We do have real life persons that prey online on our children. So I don't want us to get caught up in what the legislation say and this information asset and that data we need to protect. What data protection is all about is protecting our children. So let me put this back now in the legal context and the legal framework. Why data protection any at all? I would like to add one other layer of legal framework to this discussion around data protection. Flowing from the NITS decision, not only do we now have a duty through the Data Protection Act to protect personal data. The NITS decision, at the request of all Jamaicans who got in an uproar when the government sought to collect our information and we didn't know what they were going to do with it, the Jamaican people said, no, we don't trust you, we don't know what you're going to do with our information, and you cannot do this. And the opposition went to court and took out a constitutional motion objecting to the passage of NITS, objecting to the government collecting my data and your data and making it mandatory to do so. Our constitutional court agreed with them, with the Jamaican people, and said, we have a right to informational privacy. We have a right to protect, to own our own personal data and determine who uses it and how it is used. So that is where this whole concept of privacy and data protection comes from. Why is this important? Or if we want to take it one step back, and it has been a long evening, so I'm going to be brief and not get too deep, and I'm going to join Professor Thorpe in making design privacy resources available to the educational system for that 1-week course. So thank you very much to really join and educate, because that's the biggest issue, making aware, and 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour is far from sufficient to start even touching the tip of the iceberg. So I'm not going to go back in time, I'm going to come forward. So we've seen a lot of slides, gotten a lot of information, but I want to leave you with some very pointed notes that you could take out a pen and paper and write down. So if Professor Thorpe doesn't do anything, if e-learning doesn't do anything, if the Ministry of Education doesn't do anything, that is really irrelevant. We heard the Office of the Information Commissioner speak, and the legislation is going to be fully implemented in December 1. So do not think that because the ministry has not put anything in place that you don't have to comply with the legislation. That's the first thing that we need to appreciate. Every school is its own data controller. So that's one thing I'd like you to write down. You are a data controller and you are responsible for protecting the personal data of your students and all the other persons within that organization that you process. So that's the first thing. What do you need to be thinking about now? And this is regardless of whether or not e-learning does anything, regardless of what the ministry does anything. As a data controller, you are responsible for registering with the Information Commissioner by December 1. What does registration mean? Registration means ensuring that you'd have identified all the personal data items within your organization that you process. Registration means identifying all the data subject categories of data that you process. Registering means identifying all the persons or entities with whom you share this data. Registration means identifying all the controls that you have in place to protect this personal data that you are processing. So that is the first thing you need to do by December 1. Once you have completed that, you are not compliant. You have just come to the starting line and you have said to the Office of the Information Commissioner, yes, I have personal data and this is what I do with it. That's it. That activity alone, however, does take a significant amount of time. And we have been designed privacy as a data protection compliance consultancy service that offers implementation services. We have been challenged with answering the question, how do we help schools, small businesses, micro businesses comply with the law? Design Privacy is a profit-oriented company, like all other businesses. So naturally, we'll easily sell our services to the bigger companies who have a bigger budget. But the reality is, we are really interested in preserving the privacy and protecting Jamaican citizens, because in the information age, that protecting our data is the biggest threat we face as a nation, as individuals. That is the reality. So we have grappled with the question, how do we solve the problem for schools that don't have a big budget? There is no line item there for it. So it is a very important discussion to be had. It is not anticipated that you're going to have to find the same amount of money that a big company is going to find. But if there's nothing budgeted, how are you going to get the resources to help your schools comply? It is a very real question. So in addition to what Professor Thorpe is thinking about and contemplating, we at Design Privacy have sought to, at a very minimum, come up with a solution that can take you to the beginning line, help you put yourself in a position to register. And registration is not something nice to do or something you want to think about, So Professor Thorpe started to talk about what are the consequences if you don't comply. So what the legislation says is if you do not register, you should not be processing personal data. So if at December 1, 2023, you have not registered with the Information Commissioner's Office, it is actually, you are committing a criminal offense. That is what it means. And what do I mean when I say that? If it is the Office of the Information Commission understands or learns that you have not registered, her office has the power to do two things: fine you for $2 million, or expose you to criminal prosecution where you can be put in jail. So we're not putting, Jamaica and Parliament isn't putting people in jail because there's a data breach. No, it is the risks associated with persons, or in this case, the risk that our children are faced with. So we do have to realize that we are processed. Not only are we custodians of their physical body when they are in school, that's not sufficient. We have to now realize that we have put our children in this wide world of the internet, and we have exposed them to predators from all across the world, locally and internationally. So with that, there is a duty to ensure there are basic data processing standards in place. And that's the beauty about the legislation as well. It sets out what are the basic things you must do to protect our children. And on that note, as I said, it has been a very long evening, and I hope we have some, well, because of the laptop, that was an excellent, that was excellent. We know everybody is still watching because we're waiting to see if they win the laptop, so that was good. So I know I still have a full audience. I do want to leave with you one thing before we go. I am a data subject. You are a data subject. We are adults. We have made it thus far. We have, when I was growing up, when I had my son, I asked my friend the question. I know what it was to do road. Everybody know here what to do road. And we look and we say, so how is my son going to make it through the world by himself, knowing what Jamaica is today? And the reality is, my friend looked at me and told me that you got up to trouble? Yes. Did you make it through? Yes. So don't worry about your son. That doesn't apply in the information age. We cannot throw them out there and think that it's okay. We have to be responsible custodians and take care and put the appropriate controls in place. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share, and I really look forward to being part of the conversation going forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Cameron. All right, we're going to take some questions that's in the chat. Sorry about that. Michelle Hansen, she's asking, well, it's a statement. I'm listening carefully here. I don't have anything, she says she doesn't hear anything mentioned about the Early Childhood Commission. However, when they don't get it right, they all get the blame in the early childhood sector. So I don't know if anybody from the panel wants to comment on that. They're saying that nothing, is being said pertaining to early childhood. So that's just a statement there. Sure, go ahead.
So the early childhood has themselves as an organization to register with the Information Commissioner and ensure they are complying with their own data, that they also have to comply themselves. It does not matter, and this is the point I was saying, if the ministry does nothing else at this stage, if early childhood education doesn't do anything at this stage, if no other government entity does anything, it does not relieve you as a data controller to comply with the legislation. Yes, there ought to be some sort of awareness for those persons that may not have access. That's why I quickly jump on the opportunity that Professor Thorpe has put on the table to raise that awareness. But the responsibility is still yours as a principal and the leader of a school.
Okay, great. Alika Smith, I hope I got the first name correct. She's asking, well, good evening. Is there a simple step-by-step procedural document that one can follow to become compliant?
So there is a simple, well, we have simplified the process of registration. That can be simplified with a lot of effort. But however, the act of becoming compliant, there is no checklist, there is no one thing that you can do by yourself. So in short, the answer is no. Yes, to put yourself in a position to register. We have worked very hard on simplifying that, but outside of that, no, there's no checklist or one document that you can use to become compliant. That's the reality. And that is why Professor Thorpe speaks about creating a line item in your budget, because you will need additional resources to help you become compliant. There's no question about it.
Okay, and this is just a suggestion from Professor Felix, and I'm sure it has to do with Ms. Barclay's presentation. And he's suggesting that we begin to ask school boards to set up committees that will assist in this venture. The board then should comprise of experts in this area, just as we engaged people with financial expertise, help the finance and audit committees of the board. I'm not sure if anybody from the panel wants to comment or is in agreement with the suggestion by Professor Felix here. You're shaking your head, Mr. Cameron. You have something you want to say?
That sounds like Professor Kinadejo, yes?
That is correct.
I will agree with him that that there needs to be that done as a part of the. I don't think the Office of the Information Commissioner will take on that role prescriptively, but in the context of the Ministry of Education and within the respective school administration, that has to be done. I will go further to say that the whole issue of understanding that workflow, based on that earlier question, I think we in the academia, for example, can help with defining some element of what that workflow could look like to help the schools going forward. But I think the matter now rests with the educators, and being cybersecurity provision at the university level, we have a formidable role to play in supporting the outcomes here. So, yes, go ahead. Yes.
So the commissioner spoke to that earlier, the whole question of codes of practice, and Professor Thorpe has been speaking heavily about developing these sort of workflows for the educational system. So that the legislation, as I indicated, is not one size fits all. The legislation anticipates that different industries, such as the educational industry, will come together and look and examine how do we process personal data? What sort of additional codes or data sharing agreements do we need to have in place to specifically treat with our industry? Once that is done, the legislation provides that that is submitted to the Information Officer, the Information Commission, for her to then take to Parliament, and that will go on because there is no one size fits all. But before you can talk about developing codes within an industry, you first need to have implemented or attempt to implement the data protection framework to understand what works and what does not work. This is not an academic exercise. This is, and that's ironic, it's not, no pun intended. It's not an academic exercise. It is practitioners saying, okay, this does not work in this context, or we can augment the process in this context. And in the GDPR, one of the questions that was asked earlier, to what extent does Jamaican laws comply with the international standards? We are very much in alignment with those international standards. And one issue that comes to mind is in Europe, they have made provision for each country to identify how do you define a child? Because different European countries have different ages. And that may not be the best example, but educators need to come together. And once you have complied with the data processing standards, what should we develop for ourselves as an industry? So I don't know which is the appropriate body, Professor Thorpe, but first you need to start implementing, and then there should be some oversight body made up of the educational entities that start coming up with this code, because the Information Commission are not going to write the codes for you. She doesn't know anything about your industry. So there is an opportunity for you to play an active role in building out the framework for your industry.
All right, and it's interesting that, from what you just said, Mr. Cameron, because there's this question, and the person is asking, the MOE is aware of the types of personal data that is captured by the schools. You know where I'm going. Will the MOE register on behalf of all schools?
No. So I was hoping that I made that point very clearly.
Yeah.
I am hoping that I've made that point very clearly. Each principal represents a data controller. Every principal has the responsibility to register. If she or he does not register, that principal can go to jail or cause the school to pay $2 million. The approach to be taken is the approach that Professor Thorpe has taken. You need to be lobbying the ministry for some money to get the resources to do what you have to do. That is where the ministry comes in, but they cannot register for you. It is responsible for every individual school, and that's why I was making the point. It doesn't matter if the ministry does anything else or not. It doesn't matter if e-learning does anything else or not. It is your individual responsibility.
Thank you so much. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's your individual responsibility. If you haven't, taken away one thing, remember it's your individual responsibility. Michelle, please, can you, just come and stand right beside me? And while Michelle is making her way to the podium, that brings us to the end of this evening's Cybersecurity and Data Protection Forum, and we want to, on behalf of eLearning Jamaica Company Limited and of course the Ministry of Education and Youth, we want to, of course, extend thank you to everybody that joined in on the conversation this evening, both on, on Zoom as well as on YouTube. I take this opportunity now, ladies and gentlemen, to let you know that eLearning Jamaica will be having its Technology in Education Conference on May 24th to the 25th. And if you want to, of course, hear more information on cybersecurity, as well as, other topics, and I'm not going to tell you about it now because we're going to ask for you to, stay tuned to our social media pages, which is at eLearningJA, where you will get more information on the conference. But please, of course, take note of the date and you'll be hearing from us, hearing from eLearning Jamaica Company Limited. So that is May 24th to the 25th. And I'm just looking for something here just to tell you, I should know what this is. Right. The theme of the conference is Embracing Education Transformation Through Technology Integration. So you'll definitely be hearing from us, educators online as to how you can register for the conference. Right, this is a laptop, but you're going to be making the announcement. So I'm going to be whispering in your ear. And I'm going to be telling you the institution that is the winner this evening. Let me just ensure that I have it here. Dum, 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 dum. Okay, so with that being said, I now invite Michelle Babilal to move the vote of thanks, as well as to announce the winner, of course. So announce the winner first and then do the vote of thanks. Yes.
Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, can you see the laptop? Here it is, brand new Dell laptop. And the winner of this laptop is Campion College. Congrats, Campion. I hope you will put the wealth of information that you got. Right, so we will be making contact with Campion College to collect their laptop. Congrats again. Minister Williams, CEO Lee, distinguished presenters and guests, online viewers, locally and internationally, wow. Members of the media, it is indeed my pleasure to wrap up this evening's event and to express gratitude to all those who made it a reality. This evening we were presented with not even a mouthful, a 10-course meal of very valuable information related to online safety concerns, cybersecurity, privacy within the education system, and we also learned about the new Data Protection Act. A lot of food for thought. So we have many, many takeaways and take-home messages, but just to highlight a few, I know we're running late. So Mr. Forrest in his presentation, and this is just my notes, I hope everybody was taking notes during the presentations. So Mr. Forrest told us that cybersecurity is not an IT problem, it's everybody's problem. So try and avoid disclosure of student records, ensure credentials are safe, ensure your systems are adequately backed up. And as we saw, that cybercrime in education is a prime target, and it increased by 75% last year. Ms. Barkley informed us about the Data Protection Act. And this legislation will hold you responsible for any violation of information for a subject. So it is your responsibility to appoint a data protection officer to ensure that you are compliant with this new act. Professor Thorpe, well, I don't need to go into what Professor Thorpe said, right? Because we all know that, thank you, Professor Thorpe, for your very kind gift of free cybersecurity training, cyber leadership and data protection workshop for all educators, principals, and teachers. And please do not forget to include e-learning in the rollout of the program. Correct, CEO Lee? Of course, there's nowhere else he will go, right? Okay. And then, of course, there's going to be some amount of investment in protecting the data that is being held in the education system. So over to you, Minister Williams. Mr. Cameron, the two things: you must comply with the regulation by December 1st. Every school is a data controller. So again, every school is a data controller, and you are responsible for protecting the data that you capture. You're also responsible for, you individually are also responsible for registering with the OIC by, and OIC means Office of Information Commission, right, Commissioner, by December 1st, 2023. So once again, thank you, Minister Williams, for hosting our event this evening, our presenters for sharing so simply and succinctly. You made it very easy for us to absorb all of the information. CEO Andrew Lee, moderator Kim, and the rest of the e-learning team that brought all of this together to make it a reality. Of course, you, our online viewers, locally, internationally, hopefully you found this evening to be informative and worthwhile. And of course, thanks to our GIS team for bringing us live and direct, both to the island as well as to the world. Yes, hopefully the world. So once again, thank you and have a good evening. Campion will be in touch.